Stormtroopers are one of the most iconic symbols of Star Wars and the Galactic Empire. There were millions of these white armored soldiers throughout the galaxy before the fall of the Empire. We never get exact figures, but we know from the Rogue One visual dictionary that a regular Imperial Star Destroyer carried an average capacity of 9,700 Stormtroopers. So what happened to all these troopers after Palpatine's Empire came crashing down? The short answer is that it depends on which continuity you're focusing on. Of course, I never give you just the short answer, so we're going to look at every major outcome. I'll examine the Empire's purges and the secret rise of the First Order in the unknown regions, but we'll also do a deep dive into the Warlords era in Legends and the Imperial Remnant's evolution into the Fell Empire. This is going to be a fun one, so let's get started. I want to begin this video by establishing the end of the Empire, because there are significant differences between the current canon and the Legends expanded universe. Both have some fascinating and entertaining storylines, though of course, everybody has their own personal preferences. Let's begin with the canon ending. So firstly, the Battle of Endor isn't the final battle for either continuity. It is definitely a crucial incident because of the Emperor, Darth Vader, and many of the Imperial High Command lose their lives. Stormtroopers played a key role on Endor, with an entire legion suffering a humiliating defeat. The Emperor tasked them with defending the Death Star's shield generator. They were supposed to be the Empire's elite shock troops, but a small rebel strike force and their primitive teddy bear allies defeated them with makeshift traps. The Essential Guide to Warfare says that a legion contained between 8,000 and 12,800 soldiers, depending on the source material. Meanwhile, each Imperial Star Destroyer could have a complement of up to 10,000 troopers, with about the same number of these capital ships spread across the galaxy. If you add in all the garrisons on Imperial worlds, that's a lot of Stormtroopers. Well, the General has been making additions to his collection for several years now, and if you're anything like me, you've probably imagined what it could be like to own a saber yourself. So that's why I started my own store called Stickman Sabers, with a singular goal in mind. Make sabers that look amazing, being inspired by iconic designs, but specifically built to actually duel with. No worrying about babying them, just pick them up and go ham. They're equipped with state-of-the-art pixel technology, giving off an incredibly bright light that will light up the darkest rooms out there. And obviously have that iconic hum, just feels right the moment you switch it on. And for a limited time, if you pick a collector's saber up, you'll also get 2 combat sabers for free. So, if you ever thought about starting your own collection, this is a pretty good place to start. Links in the description, and now, let's get back to the video. Stormtroopers played a significant role in the Empire's last stand on Scarif during Operation Cinder. This was Emperor Palpatine's plan to punish and seek revenge against his servants for allowing him to die. It was a truly horrendous series of events that wreaked havoc across many systems and cost millions of lives. Counselor Gallius Rax took control of the surviving Imperial military and moved his forces into the Inner Rim. The novel Aftermath, Life Debt, explains how he secretly planned to execute Palpatine's strategy to purge the Empire and create a new fanatical order in its place. Rax sidelined Admiral Ray Sloane, who succeeded Admiral Piet as the ranking officer of the surviving Imperial fleet at the Battle of Endor. He also pushed Grand Vizier Mas Amedda to one side as he looked to achieve his psychotic dream. Rax's soldiers didn't know that he planned to sacrifice most of his troops while saving only those he believed essential to creating the new First Order. This culminated in the Battle of Jakku and Operation Cinder. The latter saw the Empire bombard multiple planets, including Imperial worlds, causing mass devastation. However, we know that at least one Imperial unit defected during this atrocity. Inferno Squad was a 4-person special operations team that fought alongside conventional Imperial Stormtroopers and standard Imperial military corps. According to Star Wars Battlefront 2, the New Republic accepted and integrated Inferno Squad, despite their dark reputation for being the Emperor's enforcers. The Republic likely repeated this with many more Imperial units after the conflict. We see in The Mandalorian that they were subject to re-education programs after the war, before assimilating into the Republic's military. The idea was to make them understand the extent of the Empire's atrocities and abuses during their 3-decade galactic rule. However, it's easy to forget that there were many ordinary people in the Imperial ranks. Biggs Darklighter and Han Solo both attended the Imperial Academy because they saw it as the best option to do something meaningful with their lives. Luke Skywalker also believed that it would help him to get off Tatooine and see the galaxy. In Star Wars Rebels, Ezra Bridger is openly concerned that regular folks will take the easy option and join the Empire. That's why it's not surprising that the Empire fractured so quickly. Many stormtroopers surrendered to the New Republic or deserted as the Imperial command structure broke down. However, some also stayed loyal and joined Imperial Remnant groups throughout the galaxy. Again, in The Mandalorian, we see stormtroopers, including elite armored commandos in Beskar armor, fighting alongside Moff Gideon. He also infamously had death troopers under his command. We first see these black-armored elite stormtroopers in Rogue One, and they quickly became fan favorites. A squadron of death troopers fought for Grand Admiral Thrawn in the Ahsoka TV show too. The problem for Imperial Remnant forces was that it was increasingly difficult to recruit and train stormtroopers. Firstly, they lost access to many educational facilities, including those on Corellia and Lothal, after suffering defeat at the hands of the Republic. We'll cover Legends in detail later, but it takes this even further with the destruction of Karita, the site of the Empire's primary stormtrooper training facility. Kip Duran uses the Sun Crusher to cause a nearby star to go supernova. Duran didn't realize that his brother Zeth was on the planet and almost saved him, but instead saw him disintegrate in front of him. Meanwhile, the Imperial Remnant lost thousands of stormtrooper cadets. Obviously, this is an extreme example, but it shows how challenging it was to maintain previous troop levels, because their forces were so fragmented. This is consistent in both continuities. Gradually, stormtroopers became a reminder of the fallen Empire during the uneasy years of peace between the Battle of Jakku and the rise of the First Order. Stormtrooper armor became a popular collectible across the galaxy with some mercenary and pirate units. An Ewok even wore a stormtrooper helmet during the Ewok Civil War. Yes, nothing is sacred in Star Wars. There was a battle between two Ewok tribes in about 5 ABY, according to the Hyperspace Stories Annual. The Empire officially surrendered to the Republic when Mas Amedda and Mon Mothma signed the Grand Accordance on Chandrila in 5 ABY. This placed disarmament limitations on military technology and production amongst the Imperial remnants in the known galaxy. It also officially dissolved the Imperial Stormtrooper Corps. Of course, we know that a new faction was secretly training even more fanatical and dangerous troopers in the unknown regions, so let's talk about the rise of the First Order next. Stormtroopers began to reappear in the galaxy in staggering numbers in 21 ABY. After Operation Cinder, Admiral Ray Sloane led most of the surviving Imperial forces into the unknown regions. She killed Gallius Rax because she believed he was too radical. But she saw an opportunity to rebuild the Empire in a more efficient and powerful form by following his plan to flee the galaxy. The Force Awakens Visual Dictionary reveals how Sloane and Brindle Hux led a massive exodus to the unknown regions. The dark side adept Snoke assisted them on their journey through this treacherous section of the galaxy by guiding them along ancient hyperspace lanes. Don't forget, the unknown regions are incredibly dangerous because of the number of spatial anomalies, including black holes, gravity wells, and supernovae. It's also constantly shifting, so it's almost impossible for explorers to chart through conventional methods. The Chiss used Force-sensitive navigators to guide their journeys through the unknown regions. Meanwhile, the Legends novel Outbound Flight reveals how Joruus C'baoth led a civilian exploration mission with the intention of penetrating deep into the unknown regions. He planned to use the Jedi's powers to navigate safely through its many dangers. Anyway, getting back on track, the new mysterious First Order began consolidating its forces. The Force Awakens' incredible cross-sections reveals how Quat and Tralla, a subsidiary of the famous Quat Yard shipyards, built the First Order's next-generation Resurgent-class Star Destroyers. Meanwhile, they needed to enhance their military, so they opted to begin a mass kidnapping campaign. Project Resurrection was the First Order's plan to kidnap children and create a new indoctrinated army to destroy the Republic. The Rise of Skywalker Expanded Edition reveals that Lando Calrissian's infant daughter, Kadara, was one of the thousands of victims across the galaxy. Lando didn't know what happened to her, but assumed that if she survived that, she became a stormtrooper. Rumors of Project Resurrection reached the Republic, but the Senate refused to take it seriously. I actually think Project Resurrection is an awesome addition to Star Wars lore because it's so dark and evil, but I do find the Senate's insipid response a little unbelievable. Princess Leia and her private resistance forces attempted to fight the truth. After the Hosnian Cataclysm, also known as the Starkiller Base incident, the First Order recruited even more ruthlessly than before. They conscripted children from their conquered worlds as they looked to consolidate and dominate the galaxy. The Rise of Skywalker Visual Dictionary says that Kijimi had almost all of its children stolen by the First Order. So, what made First Order Stormtroopers different from their Imperial forebears? Firstly, in the beginning there were fewer of them, but they received better training because of this. Nobody can quite agree if the Imperial-era Stormtroopers were elite shock troops or average recruits in shiny white armor. We get different perspectives from various characters. Captain Rex is openly contemptuous of them in Star Wars Rebels as he compares them to his fellow clone troopers. However, Obi-Wan Kenobi described them with a begrudging respect in Episode 4. It's clear, though, that not every Stormtrooper Legion is equal. For example, there's a big difference between the prestige of the 501st and the units on guard duty on Wabiani. The First Order maintained quality control by training their Stormtrooper recruits from birth, not from adolescence. They had numbers instead of names so that they didn't develop any sense of individuality. The idea was for them to be a single, merciless, faceless bloc against the Republic with absolute loyalty to the First Order. We see in Episode 7 that they took this to such an extent that First Order Stormtroopers were forbidden to remove their helmets. This may seem similar to Din Djarin's Mandalorian cult, the Children of the Watch. However, the difference was that the armor gave each Mandalorian individuality and was sacred to them. The Stormtroopers were just cogs in a machine. If they showed signs of unusual or irrational behavior, they would undergo memory wipes like droids. First Order officers treated their Stormtroopers with brutality. Those they considered to be inept on the battlefield were left to die. The Phasma novels reveals that they received subliminal sleep messages during their training. However, while their superiors saw them as disposable, they underwent much more effective training than their Imperial forebears. They experienced live fire drills and melee sparring, so they were better able to respond to real battles. Meanwhile, they wore next-generation armor that resembled the Imperial version, but with a streamlined twist. Captain Phasma once said that not even a Wookiee could break it. I'm not sure about this, but it's a testament to their improvements. Star Wars Meet the Villains Stormtroopers says that it was also more flexible and comfortable. Eventually, Sith troopers superseded the white-armored Stormtroopers as the key force amongst the Sith Eternal and the First Order. These were even more brainwashed soldiers who had their personalities repressed from birth by dark-side powers. Palpatine and his minions blamed the Jedi for giving clone troopers individuality and personalities. They failed to totally repress this in the old Galactic Empire, and even in the First Order, as we see with Finn. They weren't Force-sensitive, but they shared the same devotion to the Sith religion. These troopers wore red armor like the Sith's crimson lightsabers and the Emperor's traditional guard since the Old Republic. While they look awesome, they faced destruction after the defeat of the First Order and Sith Eternal at Exegol. Each legion of the Sith troopers was named after a former Dark Lord of the Sith, including Tenebris and Revan. The reference book, The Secret of the Sith, describes them as Palpatine's most elite soldiers and the bulk of the Sith Eternal's forces. Reportedly, they had even more durable composite armor than standard First Order Stormtroopers, and were even more effective. Like all Stormtrooper generations, the Sith Trooper had several variants. The most significant was the Sovereign Protector. These elite troopers wielded special two-pronged blasters and acted as the reborn Palpatine's personal guard. Rey and Ben Solo fought several of these in Palpatine's throne room on Exegol. They effectively served the same role as the old Red Guard, but I'd argue they lacked the mystique of the previous generation. Also, some fans will probably argue that the Sith troopers are technically not Stormtroopers. They're wearing red Stormtrooper armor, and they serve the same function for the Sith Eternal, so I think it's fair to call them the final version of Stormtroopers in canon. That's where we'll leave the current canon behind and jump deep into the Legends continuity, because there's a lot more we can analyze here. Stormtroopers continued to play a role in the galaxy in the Warlord era that gradually emerged after the fall of the Empire in the Legends continuity. This lasted for about 15 years after the Battle of Endor, as the New Republic attempted to mop up the galaxy of the remaining Imperial Warlords. One of the earliest major differences in this storyline is that Sate Pestage was Imperial Grand Vizier and took the throne after Palpatine's death. However, he lacked the charisma, the force powers, and the support to maintain his grip, so the Empire disintegrated into warring factions. Admiral Blitzer Harsk was the first new warlord to emerge, but he wasn't the last. There were many others that we encountered in the likes of Michael A. Stackpole's X-Wing series, including Isana Isard, High Admiral Teradok, and Warlord Zinj. These splinter groups vied for resources and, at times, even fought against each other. Some of them genuinely believed they could reunite the Empire as a glorious leader, while others simply wished to exploit the chaos by carving out their corner of the galaxy and getting very rich. The problem was that there was a limit on the amount of resources that go around. For example, while Warlord Jinj had the Iron Fist, a super star destroyer, he also relied heavily on Victory-class star destroyers because of their smaller crew requirements. Similarly, some of the forces still had stormtroopers in their ranks, but they were increasingly difficult to replace or source. I already mentioned the destruction of Kurita, but many more deserted or assimilated into the New Republic. Everything changed when Grand Admiral Thrawn returned to the known galaxy and began his crusade against the Republic. The Chiss pushed the Republic to the brink in Timothy Zahn's Thrawn novels, and there's a good reason why he's one of the most popular Star Wars villains ever. One of his most significant strategic ambitions was the creation of a new clone army to fill the ranks of his empire. These stormtroopers were very different from the Grand Army of the Republic during the Clone Wars. Firstly, Thrawn used Sparty cloning cylinders instead of the Kaminoan cloning facilities. In Heir to the Empire, Thrawn describes them as a small, almost trivial piece of technology. Sparty clone cylinders stood 4 meters tall and acted as mechanical wombs filled with nutrient chemicals and catalyzers to grow clone armies. The immediate advantage was that they grew clones to full maturity in just 1 year. By comparison, the Kaminoans took 10 years to grow a single clone. However, the Kaminoans ensured that their clones underwent rigorous training and constant learning over that decade. The Sparty method created clone personalities by flash pumping them with memories of another person. This was incredibly dangerous and had the risk of clone madness, as we see with Joruus C'baoth in The Last Command. The Grand Admiral sped up the process even further by using Ysalamari. These creatures cut off the clone's connection to the Force so Thrawn could grow them in 15 to 21 days. There were likely millions of them running around the galaxy by the time of the Battle of Bilbringi and Thrawn's death in 9 ABY. Thrawn found 20,000 Sparty cylinders in the Emperor's secret storehouse in Mount Tantiss on Wayland. Meanwhile, he located the legendary Katana fleet of long-lost dreadnoughts. His clones crewed these ships against the New Republic, while stormtroopers began reappearing en masse, too. We don't know who provided the template for Grand Admiral Thrawn's clone army, but it probably doesn't really matter as long as they were physically capable. Order 66, a Republic Commando novel, gives more context. In this text, the commandos of Omega Squad encounter some Sparty-grown clones. Omega Squad noted that they only received flash training, and their weapons accuracy was pitiful. Meanwhile, they didn't even bother to take cover from enemy fire or have any awareness of their Mandalorian heritage. We don't really know how good Thrawn's troopers were because there weren't many land battles in Timothy Zahn's series. However, they would likely have depended on their sheer weight of numbers. It's also worth noting that we have no idea what their lifespan was. However, it's likely that they aged quickly as a side effect of their birth process. Ultimately, this new generation of stormtroopers was unable to conquer the galaxy and re-establish the Empire without Thrawn's guidance. However, they did boost the credibility of one of the most notorious fighting forces in the universe. A second major campaign under the reborn Emperor saw stormtroopers engage the Republic in battle again. However, they gradually became obsolete under his vision, as we see in the Dark Empire comic book series. Palpatine secretly rebuilt his strength in the deep core and used clone bodies to physically return to the galaxy. He allowed warlords to fight each other to cull the weak before sweeping in and picking up the pieces, retaking Coruscant in the process. He also briefly took Luke Skywalker as his apprentice. His forces infamously used the horrendous world devastators to consume the resources from targeted planets. The reborn Palpatine became increasingly unstable due to clone body decay, while internal betrayals weakened the Dark Empire. Although stormtroopers remained a symbol of Imperial authority and fear, they were gradually superseded by shadow troopers. These were Force-enhanced troops that expressed Palpatine's new vision of a galaxy ruled directly through the Force. The Dark Empire series has a profound influence on the sequel movies in the Disney canon, with a lot of this being relatively familiar. After Palpatine's final death, the planet Biss suffered total destruction with catastrophic losses. The Emperor died along with his fleet, his advisors, his soldiers, and dark side adepts. The revived Empire was no more, and disintegrated into fragments once more. The Stormtrooper Corps fell into increasing decline over the decade between 9 ABY and 19 ABY. There were two main reasons for this. Number 1 was the difficulty in replacing troopers after many devastating losses. The second was that the New Republic was increasingly growing in power by this point. This made the last fragments of the Empire less appealing, so many Imperials deserted or enlisted in the Republic's military instead. Remember, throughout history, becoming a Stormtrooper was just a job for many people. Yes, they became increasingly fanatical while they fought for the Empire, but often it was a way to get off backworld planets with few prospects. Gradually, however, a centralized Imperial Remnant developed and became a formal secondary force in the galaxy. Supreme Commander Gilad Pellaeon led the surviving forces, although they lost vast swathes of territory over the years. Pellaeon was, of course, Thrawn's loyal second-in-command during his reign. However, by 12 ABY, an official Imperial reunification took place under Admiral Dala. She allied with Vice Admiral Pellaeon, who eventually succeeded her as leader of the Imperial Remnant. Gradually, the Imperial Remnant suffered more defeats until it existed only in 8 backwater sectors in the Outer Rim. Finally, Pellaeon sued for peace with the New Republic and signed a peace accord with New Republic representative Ponk Gavrison. The Galactic Civil War was finally, officially over. The role of Imperial Stormtroopers changed during this brief period of relative peace in the galaxy. Now the Imperial Remnant and the Republic were no longer gunning for each other. They didn't need to be an aggressive force. The novel Spectre of the Past reveals how they were primarily used as guards on Remnant worlds. Some Stormtroopers did fight for the Second Imperium, another faction that tried to revive the old might of the Empire. This takes place in the Young Jedi Knight series, but it's a relatively minor uprising compared to the grand scale of the Thrawn and Dark Empire invasions. The former Jedi Knight Brachus created the Shadow Academy, a cloaked space station with facilities to train Dark Jedi, Stormtroopers, and TIE pilots. Ultimately, the Shadow Academy and the Second Imperium suffered destruction in an engagement with Luke Skywalker and Admiral Akbar above and on Yavin 4. The remaining Imperium Stormtroopers were killed or captured by the Republic during the battle. Meanwhile, the Imperial Remnant was struggling to consolidate itself as an independent, alternative political state in the galaxy. Economic development after the Pellaeon-Gavrison Treaty was slow for a couple of reasons. Firstly, some unscrupulous Imperials stole massive fortunes. Another issue was that New Republic goods could be imported cheaply, which impacted Imperial industries and caused many citizens to live in grinding poverty. The novel Dark Tide II: Ruin deals with this tumultuous period and explains how the Imperial Remnant entered contact with the Empire of the Hand. Created by Grand Admiral Thrawn, this was a secret force in the Unknown Regions led by former Imperials, including Admiral Voss Park and Baron Sunter Fell. We know that Stormtroopers, including the legendary 501st Legion, fought for the Empire of the Hand. In 22 ABY, they dispatched the 501st to overthrow a warlord on the planet Kariak in the novel's Fool's Bargain. Ironically, the Empire of the Hand used its Stormtroopers as liberators rather than conquerors. One of the Empire of the Hand's missions was to bring back Thrawn in clone form. Ultimately, the clone was destroyed as Luke Skywalker and Mara Jade tried to escape during the Kamas document crisis. However, the Imperials became increasingly isolationist throughout this period, with the Republic content to leave them to their own devices. Everything changed when the Yuuzhan Vong entered the picture. The extragalactic invasion threatened the lives of every being in the Galactic Alliance, the New Republic's successor state, and the Imperial Remnant. At first, the Remnant believed that the Vong would just sweep past them, but Supreme Commander Pellaeon eventually recognized the threat they presented and agreed to fight alongside the Galactic Alliance after a meeting with Leia Organa Solo. He persuaded the Remnant's politicians that if the New Republic fell, the Remnant would not be able to hold back the Yuuzhan Vong on their own. Despite this, they didn't have many direct confrontations with the Yuuzhan Vong until the enemy's failed invasion of Bastion. This convinced the Remnant of the devastating threat they faced, and they poured their resources into the war effort as they evolved into an elite fighting force once again. Interestingly, during this period, the makeup of the Imperial Remnant gradually evolved. They could no longer depend on just humans to fill the ranks of their stormtroopers, so they increasingly accepted non-humans. Previously, during the height of the Empire, it was even rare for recruiters to accept female human stormtroopers, never mind aliens. According to the female stormtrooper Islia Drutch, this had little to do with prejudice against females. It was simply because stormtrooper training was brutal, and females were simply more likely to wash out than males. The Essential Guide to Warfare also notes that this is reflected in stormtrooper armor, which was uncompromising in its physical requirements. Just for context, this is consistent with real-world warfare and recruitment standards. For example, no female has yet passed the SAS selection process, despite it being open to women since 2018. According to the BBC, only 3% of all potential recruits make it through the grueling specialized training program. It's a similar story with the US Navy SEALs, which has been open to female candidates since 2016. However, the Navy refuses to lower training standards, and all candidates must meet the same standards. Going back to the galaxy far, far away, the Imperial Remnant and the Empire of the Hand also allowed more aliens to become stormtroopers during this period. They became less xenophobic by necessity. Later, Jagged Fel would actively promote a relatively new tradition of recruitment from within the Remnant. Fel wanted to make soldiering a hereditary career, with all children born to stormtroopers encouraged to enlist. We see this in practice in the 4th issue of the Legacy comic book series. Continuity of service was an unofficial nepotism that allowed generations of the same family to serve in the same units. In the Second Imperial Civil War, we see Anson Trask join the Joker Squad of the 407th Stormtrooper Division despite his inexperience. Meanwhile, in the period immediately post-Yuuzhan Vong War, they dispatched stormtroopers to planets ravaged by the conflict to help rebuild them. Fel created the Imperial mission after an off-the-cuff remark by Han Solo. This was a peaceful society whose mission was to spread influence by providing aid to people and planets, while helping those in poverty. Again, we know that many people simply enlisted because it got them off-world and gave them a good paycheck and a sense of purpose. Like Jess Justang in the Legacy comic book series Jedi vs. Sith. The Essential Guide to the Force confirms that there were no clone soldiers in the Imperial ranks by this period. The poor quality of the Sparty cloning cylinders made them unsustainable for long-term use, so the Remnant depended on recruits. The Imperial Remnant fought alongside the Galactic Alliance again during the Second Galactic Civil War. This was when the Alliance came under the control of the Sith Lord Darth Caedus, formerly Jacen Solo, the son of Han and Leia Organa. Legacy of the Force Invisible notes that the stormtroopers of this period were a level above their predecessors and were expert marksmen. Meanwhile, they had new units in their ranks, including the shock troopers of the Imperial Elite Guard. The Elite Guard had gray strips on the shoulder pads of their armor, marking them as Special Forces units. They impressed Caedus with their abilities, and he even compared them to Darth Vader's 501st Legion. The Elite Guard fought in several engagements throughout this conflict, including a special mission to destroy the Jedi Order's secret base on Shedu Mad. After the conflict ended, Luke Skywalker helped to install Jagged Fel as the Remnant's Chief of State. This role would evoke into a hereditary monarchy known as the Fel Empire and survive for almost 100 years. Stormtroopers rose to prominence again under the Fel Empire, a heavily militarized society by 130 ABY. The 501st remained stationed on Bastion, but we see in the Legacy series how it was radically different from the version nicknamed Vader's Fist. There was even a Tal Stormtrooper, so they had species-specific armor for different types of bodies. However, the general appearance of the armor remained the same as before. The Empire defeated the Galactic Alliance in the Sith Imperial War, with stormtroopers at the forefront of their victory. Emperor Roan Fel, the grandson of Jagged Fel, reluctantly accepted the aid of Sith allies when the war began. Stormtroopers participated in the Massacre of Ossus, where they fought against the Jedi in a brutal battle, overwhelming their enemy. This ignited a third Great Jedi Purge, with many of them going into hiding again. Eventually, Darth Krayt usurped the throne and declared himself Emperor. Once again, stormtroopers became a symbol of fear and tyranny across the galaxy, as he used them to brutalize and conquer. However, stormtroopers found themselves fighting against other stormtroopers as Krayt's forces took on Fel loyalists in a bitter and bloody war. Ultimately, it was all a horrendous waste of life, resources, and effort. Krayt and Fel both lost their lives, and in the end, the Galactic Federation Triumvirate formed. The Empire declared its first female ruler, Marasiah Fel, and agreed to peace with the Jedi and the Galactic Alliance. Again, stormtroopers played a key role in this horrible war. That's the end of our Stormtrooper timeline. There's no doubt that they are some of the most awesome ground forces in any sci-fi universe. The fact that there are so many variants only adds to their popularity. From the Snow Troopers on Hoth to the First Order Flame Troopers, there are so many awesome versions. However, nothing will ever beat the classic white-armored Stormtroopers from Episode 4. Their skull-like helmets deliberately evoke death, and they stood in perfect contrast to Darth Vader as they boarded the Tantive 4. From a sheer aesthetic perspective, they're unbeatable. That's why so many fan groups across the world opt to cosplay in Stormtrooper armor instead of Rebel uniforms. They simply look better. Regardless of whether you prefer the Canon or Legends continuities, you can know that one thing will be consistent: Stormtroopers are always awesome. It's just a shame that we didn't get more of Captain Phasma in the movies. Oh, and again, for a limited time, every Stickman saber purchase comes with 2 additional combat sabers, so you're more than ready for your own duels. If that sounds like something you'd want to look into, the link's in the description.